Hello readers and writers, I'm MJ and it's time for August reading wrap up. August was a fairly slow reading month with me. Thankfully I started out strong because there was an entire week where I didn't even finish a single book. So in total I read 8 books for the month, which I'm very happy with, even though it's a lot lower than the amount that I normally read. Before I go over the specific stats, I'm looking over the 5 books I had on my TBR. So the 5 books I had were Lessons in Chemistry, which I did read, Lore Olympics, which I also read, Parallel Worlds, which I am halfway through, but have not finished, Little Fires Everywhere, I did read, and Dare Mighty Things, which I have not read yet. I think I just keep forgetting to pick it up because it's an ebook. Not great on finishing my TBR for the month, but not a strong reading month in general. So to go over the stats, I read 8 books, total of 3,281 pages. Most of the books were larger, so 75% of them were between 300 and 499 pages, so that's why my page count is higher. 13% were actually over 500 pages, and only one book, or 13%, was under 300 pages. So definitely a lot of longer books in August. All of them were fiction, because my nonfiction book, Parallel Worlds, I did not finish. And my most read genre was fantasy at 4 books. I read 2 science fiction and 2 literary books. 50% of the books were digital because I read a lot of ARCs. 38% were print, which were pretty much all the books on my TBR. And then 13% was audio. Alright, now to get into what books I actually read, and this will go from the books that I finished first to the books I finished last. The first book I finished is Picard: Second Self, and I actually finished this listened to this via audiobook, even though I have the hardcover. I got the audiobook from the library. I really enjoyed this book. I think it gave a lot of background information on the characters that were missing from the series. So I do think the books definitely add to going through and watching the TV show. I'm very excited for the next book to be released because Star Trek Picard is now over. So this is the only way we're going to be getting new content, and it's behind the seasons, so there's still a lot of gaps, I think, that can be filled in. But it's one of those things, if you don't like Star Trek, you're probably not going to enjoy this. And if you do, you should absolutely pick it up. Next I read Starter Villain by John Scalzi, and this is an arc that I read for a book that comes out, I believe, in September. And I think John Scalzi tends to have 2 different types of science fiction that he writes. One is like epic war battles, and the other is more humorous, and this is one that is on the more humorous side, and it's about a normal bloke that got fired from his job as a journalist, is working as a substitute teacher, living in his deceased father's house, when he finds out that his uncle died and made him the heir to a super villain legacy. And so he's thrown into that world and trying to navigate it with all sorts of humor. It was a fun read. Yeah, I mean, it was fun, which sometimes you just need a nice, fun read. Then I read Foothills Fae Academy, Book 1, by Kaylee Woodridge. This is an indie book that I picked up. The first book in this series is written to be more middle grade because it's going to follow the characters as they progress. It probably is not my preferred genre. I'm glad I picked this one up. Definitely go check out my review for more information to see if this is one that will be right for you. Next, I read Lore Olympics. This is a graphic novel about, what is it, Greek mythology, Persephone, and all that jazz. This my kid actually picked up, but since I'd been seeing it all over Instagram, I wanted to read it. I don't think this is really my thing. I may read the other volumes if we buy them for my kid, just because they'll be here. But if they're not interested in them, then I probably won't continue reading the series. I see why it's popular, and I see why a lot of people like it, so it's nothing on the series. It's just entirely based off of God's romantic lives, and it's just not really my thing. Next, I picked up Little Fires Everywhere. This is a copy that was gifted to me from someone on TikTok, so really appreciate that. This is more literary fiction, and I wasn't sure what to expect when I picked it up, but there is quite a lot of hard-hitting topics in this book. I do see why it is popular, and if I ever do subscribe to Hulu again, I definitely will be checking out the series. I'm not sure if I'd ever reread this book, but I am glad that I picked it up. It talks about the relationships and dynamics in more upper class planned subdivision, and how just because people are well off doesn't mean that there's not a lot going on. I do think it talks a lot about, you know, the relationship between parents and their children, and there's just a lot going on in this book. I don't know if it was definitely my favorite, but I am glad that I picked it up. Then I read another arc, The Mystery at Dunville Castle, and this is the third book in the Edinburgh Nights series. It's a urban fantasy series that has a 14-year-old as the main character, but is still adult urban fantasy. Although it could be read by younger readers, it definitely, there's nothing like content-wise that I think would be very problematic, as long as, you know, the paranormal aspect. This book specifically, like, I really like this series. I definitely am going to be continuing on with the series, and I am glad that I had an arc, and I probably will buy the book because I already have the book in hardcover, and so I won't want a book to be missing. But this one is definitely not my favorite out of the series. It felt a lot like a filler book. So, it was okay, but I'm more interested in where the next book's going to take us. Then I read Lessons in Chemistry, and this is absolutely my favorite book of the month. I'm so glad I picked it up because I wasn't certain if I was going to. I kept going back and forth on whether or not this is something that I should read, but hands down my favorite book of the month. It deals with just life and relationships, but it's told from the perspective of someone who's more logically minded, and I really appreciate that. It does have a POV of a dog in it, which again I don't usually like, but I thought it was handled well. This is a book that I probably will reread, and most definitely will be on one of my favorite books of the year video. So if you're on the fence of whether you want to read Lessons in Chemistry, I highly recommend that you just pick it up and try it, especially if you like books that have a little bit more logical main character, such as Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Not the same premise, but I do feel like the characters kind of have that same vibe. And then I went a long gap before I finished any book. I was definitely in a rut with everything, which thankfully I went on vacation to help with that. But the last book that I finished in August was The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. This is another e-arc I had from Tor and NetGalley, It is the first book in a new trilogy by V. Schwab that is a sequel trilogy to Shades of Magic. So if you have not read Shades of Magic, you definitely should start there. If you haven't read Shades of Magic in a while, you should probably reread that before reading The Fragile Threads of Power, because the book does talk about a lot of things that have happened in the first trilogy, and it doesn't like hold your hand to help you remember what those are. They just mention it and then you need to remember what they are. So if you don't necessarily remember everything, I would highly recommend a reread of the trilogy before picking up The Fragile Threads of Power. If you love the original trilogy of Shades of Magic, I do think you will also love The Fragile Threads of Power. I do think one of the criticisms of the original trilogy is that, especially the second book, can be a little slow. I think the irony is in the Fragile Threads of Power that this is kind of the pacing through. There's parts that are really fast paced, and then there's parts that are a little bit slower as well. But it's just kind of the nature of the book. And again, if you liked the trilogy, then I think you'll really like this as well. And then the nice thing is when it does slow down, it's not for like an entire book. It's just for a section of stuff that, you know, just needs to be slower, and then the pace picks back up again. There is a few new characters introduced in this story, but also the original characters come back as well. But I want to highlight one of my favorite new characters, the Queen. She is not specifically named aromantic asexual, but is described as such. So even though they don't use, or V. Schwab doesn't use the term aro-ace, there's enough actually explained in the text that I think that that was in the intention for sure. And I really like the inclusion of this character and the inclusion of this representation, and I really like how the Queen was able to have a family while being aromantic and asexual, and like to build their own sort of family. And I think that's my favorite part of this book. Now the characters are pretty much all morally gray, especially the female characters. So it's hard to like root for them per se, including the Queen, who is my favorite. But I still like them, if that makes any sense. This is my wrap up for August. So, I mean, for pretty much a month that I had a life slump, 8 books isn't too bad, and I read a lot of really great new releases as well as some backlist books, so I'm really happy with my reading. If there's anything that I read that you want to read, let me know in the comments, or anything that you've also read, let me know what your thoughts about them. And if you want to see my blog, which will be coming out on my trip, make sure that you like and subscribe. I'm a smaller channel, so it really helps me out. And as always, keep reading, keep writing, and until next time.